Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Global Compact Network Netherlands, I would like to welcome you to this webinar with the title Stakeholder Inclusion as Accelerator of the SDGs. My name is Linda van Beek, Executive Director of Global Compact Network Netherlands. And before we continue, a few practical remarks. If you would like to join the conversation on social media, which we would welcome, of course, you can use the following hashtags. You can see them on the screen. Hashtag stakeholder inclusion, hashtag uniting business. And other practical remarks. We hope to offer an interactive webinar, so please use the chat box for your questions to the speakers. Karen Maas, who has contributed to this publication as well, will have a close eye on the chat box to be sure that all your questions will be answered. And in order to avoid the disturbance of the webinar, please stay muted during the webinar. For the people who attend for the first time an event of Global Compact Network Netherlands, a few words about Global Compact. More than 10,000 companies are participants of the UN Global Compact, and 3,000 non-business members like NGOs, knowledge institutes and cities are joined the Global Compact. They are all committed to the UNGC principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment and anti-corruption, and they want to have a positive impact on the global challenges. And as a local network, we assist them in this journey. 2020 has been called by the UN the decade of action and the decade of delivery. And this means everybody should consider the way how they can contribute best to the global challenges and should take action. And as a Dutch Global Compact Network, we have also thought about our contribution in this decade of action. The Netherlands is well known for its polder model, how we call it in Dutch, the consensus-based economic and social policy making process. And this can also be translated in the way how we are used to engage internal and external stakeholders into our business. In public global and European discussions, there's more and more focus on stakeholder engagement. For example, Euro Commissioner Reinders has announced European due diligence legislation. There's a discussion about a non-financial reporting directive. And opinion leaders and researchers are pleading for a stakeholder council. But also more and more companies are motivated themselves to improve their stakeholder engagement. As Global Compact Network Netherlands, we have brought together a group of experts and researchers to make a blueprint of the way how some front-running companies in the Netherlands are performing on stakeholder engagement. We have asked them to present recommendations how companies can improve their stakeholder engagement themselves. We really believe that if we can make more companies motivated to full stakeholder inclusion, the business contribution to the SDGs will be accelerated. We are proud on the publication that we have realized, with many thanks to the authors, Nicolette and Eric, and the other experts who have contributed to it. You can see it as our present to the UN in this decade of action and delivery. What stakeholder engagement in relation with the SDGs means and what you can do, we will tell you during this webinar. Let's have a look at the agenda for the meeting today. We will start with an introduction by Hugo van Meijeveld, who will explain more the context of this topic. Then we will move on to Jeroen Veldman, who will give a more scientific explanation about why stakeholder inclusion matters. Then we will move on to the introduction to the model by Erik Breem, one of the co-authors. And after that, we will show some practical examples by companies, give you some inspiration from the Netherlands, and Nicolette Lonen, the other co-author, will moderate that discussion. So that's the agenda for today. We are very happy that you are joining us. And let's move on now to Hugo. He is a senior expert sustainability at Global Compact Network Netherlands. And he was used to be the SDG ambassador on behalf of the Netherlands. Hugo.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Linda. Let me first say that we are extremely happy that the study was so impressive that two of the nationwide well-known people wrote a preview, or let's say an introduction. The first one is Feike Siebesma, who is the former CEO of DSM, and he is now nationwide known because he is also the Corona envoy. But his statement is that the business leaders must take their guiding role to combat the sustainability, or to achieve sustainability, so to say, and to reach the SDGs. Important to have him on board. The second person is the new chair of the employers organization, Ingrid Thijssen, and who explains better that stakeholder inclusion is indispensable for the transition of companies to be purpose-led and, in the end, to reach the SDGs. And she says, don't wait, start now. So let me give a short overview of the tools that companies have. And my main message here is that the stakeholder inclusion that will be explained later on has to overarch all stages for a company. So we have first the tool of the ambition accelerator of Global Compact that has 3 stages: the mission stage, the strategy stage, and the targets stage, where the company defines its own targets as part and parcel of the SDGs. The next stage is the action manager, or perhaps it's called the dashboard in other instruments. It gives you the starting point, tells you a little bit about your return, the risk assessment in your company, and of course the impact. Then the finance and the people management are part and parcel. Next stage is the transparency of the company, helped with indicators, the measuring, and of course finally the reporting. This all ends with the communication, and part of that is the information, the sales, and the marketing. So stakeholder inclusion is dealing with all these parts. In if you have a car wash, you could say the car is running through all these stages, but the company is as well. And the lowest row is dealing with the governance and the partnership that is part of this whole process. So let me stop there with this overview and hand over to Jeroen Veldman to continue the introductions.
Right. Can you see and hear me? I am supposed.
Yes.
Okay, you can see and hear me. Great. Thank you, Karen. All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak to you today. And it has been an immense pleasure to conduct this research for the Dutch chapter of the UN Global Compact. Together with Karen Maas, who you just heard from the Impact Center at the Erasmus University, I have worked as an associate professor of corporate governance at Nairobi Business University on this research. The general importance of this type of research is that we manage to use the SDGs as a focal point to sort of explicate what stakeholder theory could mean. Most of you will be familiar with the definition given by Ed Freeman in 1980 of stakeholders as groups and individuals that have a valid interest in the activities and outcomes of a firm and on whom the firm relies to achieve its objectives. Now, that is a very generic definition of what stakeholders are and how stakeholders can be involved in companies. And when we were approached by UN Global Compact to conduct this research, we thought that the SDGs could be used as a means to focus the research further and to look at how stakeholder inclusion could take place in a practical manner. So what we focused on were 3 types of means of focusing the research further. One would be to identify types of stakeholder involvement strategies. The second would be to focus on which strategies are actually successful, which best practices may we identify in practice. And the third type of focus would be to identify the means by which successful implementation might be achieved. So that delivers altogether a framing question, and that framing question is, what can we learn from best practices with regard to implementation of the SDGs in front-running companies in the Netherlands? And as you may see in this question, we have a bit of a skewed population for the research, in the sense that many of the members that we have interviewed, many of the interviewees were actually members of the UN Global Compact, and perhaps also for that reason, front-running companies. When we conducted the research, we started with an extensive desk research in which we looked at existing academic research to clarify the concept of stakeholders and stakeholder inclusion, and to develop a bit of an overarching model, and that turned out to be an identification of 6 gears. We have Eric Brain also to thank for that, and he will take over later. And within each gear, we differentiated between 4 different steps. Once we had the model in place, we sent out surveys to companies and to NGOs to identify the motivation for stakeholder inclusion in a broad population of companies and NGOs in the Netherlands. And as of this morning, I've been informed that 70 companies have actually filled in the questionnaire, as well as 24 NGOs, which is a reasonable turnout in these sorts of surveys, especially in a smallish jurisdiction like the Netherlands. Following up from these surveys, 16 interviews were conducted by Eric Brain and Nicolette Lonen, in which 11 major companies in the Netherlands, including Philips, Auping, PostNL, KPN, Alliander, PwC, Rabobank, and Coca-Cola were interviewed. We had 4 major NGOs on board, and then we had Russell Reynolds. Once we had the results in from the surveys and the interviews, we positioned the outcomes within the 6 gears and the 4 steps, and that delivered a type of an overview of potential means by which stakeholder inclusion has been implemented and or maybe furthered in the Netherlands. We are extremely pleased with the research itself, with the way it went, and with the results that were achieved. And we are hoping that the best practices that we have identified, as well as the 4 steps within all the gears, may help companies worldwide to be more successful in the implementation of the stakeholder inclusion strategies. With that, I would like to give the floor to Eric Brain.
Yes, thank you, Jeroen. I hope you can all hear me. Thanks, Julie, for giving us the next slide. It's really my pleasure to present to you today. My name is Eric Brain. In daily life, I'm consultant at Invincis, my own firm, and I'm also one of the 2 co-authors of the report, Stakeholder Inclusion as Accelerator for the SDGs. And among others, we have developed this model for stakeholder inclusion together with the research group. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I would like to talk with you about this model. And you can also find all the information I'm about to share with you in the report. And in case you have questions during my presentation, can I remind you please to use the chat function for that. So when we started this research, it was hard to find a comprehensive and also a practical model for stakeholder inclusion. And that's when we set out on a journey to develop our own, and you're now looking at the result of that. The model starts with the recognition that there are 6 major aspects of stakeholder inclusion, and these aspects are clockwise: motivation, which is about why an organization pursues stakeholder inclusion. The orientation of targets is, for example, whether an organization pursues primarily profit targets or also targets related to customer satisfaction, or also includes longer-term societal goals, such as, for instance, circularity. Stakeholder types is about which stakeholders are included: internal stakeholders, for instance, employees. Then the first tier stakeholders with a more direct relationship with the company, like customers, suppliers, and capital providers. And then the second tier, which are others which can exercise their influence, and that includes, for example, competitors, media, rating agencies. And finally, but not least, the third tier are all other stakeholders, and that, for instance, includes also coming generations or the natural environment. Then the fourth aspect is approaches, and this deals with how stakeholders are included, and that ranges from for information purposes or consultation to involvement and partnerships. Outcomes is the fifth aspect of our model, and that can range from improved insights to validation of, for instance, the strategy, to alternatives and integrated value. And disclosure is the final and sixth aspect of our model, and that ranges from strictly mandatory or opportunistic to wider or even purpose-led disclosure. So as you see, there are 6 aspects of the model, and each of those aspects have 4 underlying gears. And it's important to note that these gears are related. And for instance, this is easily seen at the top of the model. If you look at motivation and at disclosure, the first gear of motivation is the legal obligation, which relates directly to the first gear of disclosure, which is the strictly mandatory disclosure only. So we will now have a closer look at these underlying gears. And Julie, if you can forward, yes, thank you. So this is where you can see the flow of the gears. And here you can see that there is a step process, and this suggests that gear 4 is higher, is better than gear 1. Now here's also where a caution comes in. On a systemic level, we would agree to that statement, that gear 4 is better than gear 1. But on a company level, that is not necessarily the case. And let me provide you with an example here. If, for example, can we move back to the flow of the yes, thank you, Julie. If, for example, we have companies that are operating in an environment where there are low margins, where it's very hard to benefit from increased sustainability, and where it's very hard for a government, for instance, to regulate. In such a situation, companies might focus on short-term profits, otherwise they just won't survive. So even though on a systemic level, gear 4 is much better, companies that apply gear 4 in such an environment will probably not survive. And what companies can do is to take their whole system, their whole sector or industry forward and move it up gear by gear. But that's more on a systemic level. Here in this publication, we focused on a company level. And in the flow of the gears, it starts with gear 1, why should I do it? And the legal requirements often provides the answer. Gear 2 already asks, what's in it for me? So it's more an opportunistic, business case driven perspective. Gear 3 already looks outside and asks, how can I help you? How can we create value for me and for you? And the I perspective is still much present here. Now the 4th gear is more for everyone. And that involves the stewardship approach, and then the issue or the problem that we want to solve becomes centric. So it's no longer about me or the company, it's about the issue. And this is the theory of the gears. There's a question on what I mean by stewardship.
Yes.
With stewardship, we mean a more holistic approach where we do take into account is a system view over generations. So stewardship is a slightly different way of thinking about systems which function well for all parts of that system, and therefore for all stakeholders. And that's why then the issues become centric, because in a stewardship approach, one deals with all stakeholders in these systems. And there's another question. Are you saying that sorry, I cannot see it clearly. Karen, can you read out the question?
Are you saying that a system can only be changed if an entire industry participates step by step?
No, that is not what I'm saying, but I am saying that companies, individual companies, can take the lead in that change. It's not a necessity that systemic change can only happen when all companies are involved. But it's important to note that this publication that we've written very much deals with the company level and not so much with the system level. So you will find some references there, but there is much more literature about system development out there than we've referred to. Examples of Gear 4 is the next question. It's also important to note that for some aspects, companies can be in Gear 4, while for other aspects, they are, for instance, in Gear 3. And so with that, I mean that a company, let's take an example here, like Philips, has, in terms of a target setting, has really a long-term target set which looks at helping people. It's related to SDG number 3, and it's really about solving issues with healthcare. So the goal is to improve the lives of, I believe, 3 billion people. It's written about in the annual report. It's dated by the year 2030. And it's also mentioning that it should include about 400 million in underserved healthcare communities. So it's that kind of long-term target that would be a good example of a Gear 4 target. So that is the example of Gear 4. If we can move to the next slide, please, Julie. Yes, thank you. I will not go over all the aspects in detail, but I will walk you through the structure of the report. So the report, for instance, on aspect 1 here, clearly shows the level under the motivation, but it also has some helpful questions in there. And those questions can help you to self-assessment and to apply the elements of the model that might be suitable for you. So it's really out there to help you ask the right questions internally. And hopefully also to get you and potentially others that you can inspire in the sector to the next gear.
Erik, there's another question.
Yes, Karen, go ahead, please.
From Simone, companies and their customers are all other stakeholders, and they're all part of the external system development, such as technology. Technology causes disruption. So in my view, it's all related. How do you look at that? I
absolutely agree. These issues are related. If we look at, for instance, the SDGs, it's not my phrasing, but I do like it. I'm not sure who originally came up with the phrasing, but I echo that the SDGs is not a menu, but it's a recipe. So it's important to think about all the ingredients. Otherwise, it won't get, we will have a less tasty future, I would say. Also, the recognition of connectivity and, for instance, integrated reporting in this respect is important. And integrated reporting, for instance, also recognizes that one creates value through relationship with their stakeholders. And another example of connectivity is, for instance, easily found in the World Economic Forum's report about the world risks. And it, since about a decade or so ago, it also includes a map of how these world risks are related. So I absolutely agree. Now back to the presentation. And on this slide, you see that also for each aspect, we've listed per gear some characteristics. And these characteristics are based on our research and also on the interviews that we have. And these, I think, could also be helpful as sort of example behavior that one could see or one could expect under each gear. If we can go to the next slide, please, Yuri. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is for aspect number 2, the helpful questions. And this is an example where we all see a number of questions, but it goes way too far to deal with all aspects and all questions at this stage. So I'll refrain to picking out 3 examples here. One of the examples is, for instance, on this question, who's responsible for the non-financial KPIs? And that could be a question internally being asked in your company, and that could give some interesting answers. Is it the sustainability department, or is it the business manager that's responsible for a certain KPI? And it gives you an answer to a degree on how well integrated non-financials are in the business approach. Another example is, how can you include those non-financial KPIs in your management cycles in order to also steer on them? And how can you use, for instance, impact measurement in your decision-making process? So these are examples of some of the questions we thought and we hope would be helpful under this orientation of targets, the second aspect of the model. Then if we can move to the next slide. So the title here is Elaboration on Other Aspects is in the report. So I would like to refer you to the report for more elaboration on the model. As you can see, I can talk for hours about the model, but we don't have the time for that here and now. If there are more questions, you can either ask them now or at a later stage, and otherwise I would like to hand over to Nicolette.
Yes, thank you, Erik. And I see many questions already coming in, so that's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, well, I have the honor of introducing 3 very distinguished speakers who will participate in our panel and share their tips and best practices with us. Our first panelist is Frederike Rijkse. Frederike is an advisor of sustainability at NN Group. NN Group is one of the largest insurance companies in the Netherlands, active in 18 countries, has more than 70 million customers, and was established 175 years ago. And Investment Partners, the group asset manager, has 285 billion assets under management. Our second panelist is Dylan McNeil. Dylan is Director Supplier Sustainability for Philips. Philips is a Dutch listed health technology company founded in 1891, focusing on healthcare solutions such as diagnostic imaging, patient monitoring, as well as consumer health and home care. Dylan was the Dutch SDG pioneer in 2019 for Global Compact Netherlands and is a board member of the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals. Our third panelist is Ine Stultjens. Ine is a manager marketing and communications at Royal Auping. Auping is a Dutch manufacturer of beds and mattresses. It was founded in 1868 by Johannes Auping and still is a family-owned business. Design, craftsmanship, and sustainability lie at the core of the company. And Auping is a certified B Corporation since March of this year. We have asked each panelist to present us with a short best practice, a short slide deck. So let me give the floor to Frederike first. Frederike, if you would like to kick off, please.
Sure. Thank you, Nicolette, for the nice introduction. My name is Frederike Rijkse. I work as advisor sustainability within a team called Corporate Citizenship within NN Group. And as Nicolette already shared with you, NN Group is a financial services company. We are active in 18 countries, mainly in Europe, but also in Japan. And we have insurance, banking, and asset management activities. And as you can see on the slide, the core of our strategy is creating long-term value for our stakeholders. And for the sake of time, I won't go into all of the details on the slide. And for the purpose of this webinar, I would like to focus on an example from our asset manager and an investment partners, or NNIP in short, that you can see on this slide here. As an investor, we have the responsibility to make sure that we use our influence to support the transition to a sustainable economy. And that's also the reason why we engage with many different stakeholder groups. And to support this transition to a sustainable economy, we have formulated an approach to responsible investing, which you can see on the slide here. We believe in inclusion over exclusion. Voting and engagement are therefore important pillars of our approach to responsible investing, as is ESG integration, but also restrictions. As someone can go to the, Judy, maybe you can go to the next slide, which highlights how we use our influence to support the transition to a sustainable economy. Coming back to the topic of engagement, the driving force behind our engagements is the responsible investment team. They engage with many parties such as investee companies, NGOs, and other financials. And the example that I would like to highlight for today is an engagement in the palm oil sector with Singaporean bank. Oh, I see something about jargon, the language used. I can't see the full comment. Let's see.
It's okay. I will post it
It's
a bit
okay.
later.
Yeah,
sure,
I will just continue with my story here.
Yeah.
Let's see. What was that? Where did I go? Let's see. Yeah, talking about the palm oil sector. So we have an engagement with Singaporean bank DBS. And as you're probably aware of, palm oil production is linked to many risks, including deforestation, air, soil, and water pollution, climate change, but also human rights challenges, and also negative health effects. And why we chose palm oil is because palm oil has a very complex supply chain. Therefore, the approach that we're taking is that we prefer to engage with all parties throughout the supply chain of palm oil. That means from producers to retailers, which is a large variety of parties. And also to strengthen our commitment to the sector, we became a member of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, or the RSPO, sorry for the jargon again, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative. In 2019, we engaged with DBS Bank, as I mentioned, primarily because they have a very large client base in the palm oil business. Many of the organizations that are active in palm oil industry are in Asia, so they were one of the reasons why we chose DBS to engage with. And our responsible investing team basically concluded that they score well on ESG factors, so that's environmental, social, and governance factors. However, they really needed to work on their palm oil policy to make sure that they could ensure traceability and also ensure sustainable palm oil practices in the operations of their clients. So that goes for both their existing and their new clients. And we've established a dialogue with DBS, which is already something that we're very happy with. And we have asked the company to commit to the standards of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil when they evaluate their customers. DBS then acknowledges that palm oil for them is a credit risk, but they only require less stringent commitments from their clients. So that is something we're not entirely satisfied with yet. As a result of the dialogue we have with them, they have made changes in the way that new and existing clients are evaluated and also in their audit procedures. And going forward, our ongoing focus will be on encouraging the company to commit to standards of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil for its lending practices and to improve evaluation procedures for both new and existing clients. So this is still an ongoing engagement that our responsible investing team has with them. I hope I'm still within time. I'm not sure.
You're doing great. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Frederik, there is a
Frederik,
question.
Yeah, I would like to have the presentations first and skip to the questions later
on. Okay, thanks.
So I would like to give the floor to Dylan from Philips.
Yeah, thank you. Philips has really a long supply chain, and from a sustainability perspective, it's quite a challenging area of the value chain when it comes to really driving sustainable behavior. Obviously, that's a stakeholder group that I'm just going to give an example on, given my background and my focus on running programs that try to drive change in that specific part of the value chain. And it was in 2016 that we developed a new approach on how to engage suppliers on topics like the environment, health and safety, human rights, and business ethics, moving away from an old process where we audited suppliers. And actually, if you look at the industry today, electronics manufacturing, it's more or less the standard. We had done it ourselves since 2004, and over the years did thousands of these audits. And when we started, it was extremely progressive. These days, it's very common, which would be great if only it would be effective. Because how that would work is that we would hire a third party that would check if suppliers were living up to the norms that we had contractually agreed on in a code of conduct. And the first time that a supplier would get an audit, only 7% of our suppliers would make it, meaning that 93% of our suppliers were not good enough. Suppliers would then get a lot of corrective actions and 6 months to close them out. We would swing a big stick and threaten them to end the business if they didn't. And then miraculously, almost all of them would make it, with all of a sudden more than 90% being in the green. Now, you can think, Philips, that's great. You made a sustainable impact in your supply chain in just 6 months. Hats off, chapeau, well done. Well, 3 years later, when we would go for a re-audit, it turned out that we saw the exact same issues again as before, with only 9% making it through the audit, meaning that the actions that they undertook were very short-lived. Our current approach that we started in 2016 aims to address the root causes of that. First of all, it focuses on trust, meaning bi-directional interaction with suppliers and progressive development of their capabilities in sustainability, focusing on the things that really make sense to them, given their operations, their size, and the current maturity in sustainability. So today we still track how our suppliers are doing, but we don't speak of audits anymore, we speak of assessments. And completing an assessment is not the end point, it's actually the starting point of really driving change. The emphasis is on capability building, best practice sharing, and the development of business cases to drive sustainability initiatives. Since the launch, we've made significant impacts. Each year, more than 200 suppliers actively participate, and we track how their performance develops over time. Last year, we saw an improvement of 19%. Now, what does 19% mean? Well, as a result of the program, that year alone, about 300,000 employees at our suppliers were feeling the effects of improved labor conditions, reduced risk of serious injury at the workplace, and the negative environmental impact of the suppliers was brought down. So what we are seeing is that by treating your suppliers as partners, making them part of our company purpose to improve people's lives, and really involving them in the changes that we'd like to see them make, really involving them, is a much more effective way of engaging such an important stakeholder group. I look forward to the panel and any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dylan. And I'm sure there are many questions on your presentations, which I hope will pop up later. I would like to give the floor to Ine. Ine, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Is everyone still there, still awake? Because I'm going to talk a bit about sleep, and that's not a boring topic, I guess. As I was introduced, we have been around since 1888, so over 130 years as a family business, and we produce beds and mattresses from our sustainable factory in Deventer, which is a city in the east of the Netherlands. And I wanted to share with you two examples of our practice. The first one is an example around Auping Evolve, which is a circular mattress that we have developed together with partners, and mainly developed together with DSM Niaga, because we saw that there's issues in the world and also in the Netherlands around the landfill of discarded mattresses, and we wanted to solve that issue. And we have come to a solution by building a mattress that doesn't contain any foam and any glue, but it's made of different materials, steel and polyester, and that helps reducing this landfill, because you can more easily separate all the ingredients of this mattress after the end of its life cycle. And you can recycle them in such a way that it can be done in a very qualitative way, and they can be raw materials to be used again in a mattress, in a new mattress. So one mattress becomes a new mattress time and time again. And that's the breakthrough, we think. And it might sound like a little step, but in the world of beds, we see it as an evolution in sleep. And we came across this idea because we noticed that we cannot do it by ourselves. We're a small family-owned business, 80 million of turnover. We're tiny, but we have big ambitions because we want to bring rest to the world. So that's an example, I think, in this project where we really realized that we have to collaborate with others and to take into account as a manufacturer what kind of stuff we produce and how we put it in the world, and also how we get rid of it, basically, because we are striving after a society where there's less waste, or basically no waste. And that's why we take the time to redesign our products, because we feel the responsibility as a manufacturer. And if we can move to the next slide, a thing that we have added in this mattress is an orange tag on the side of the mattress, which you can scan, and you can find out where all the ingredients, all the materials in the mattress come from. You can see who is the supplier and where was it sourced. And for this mattress, we have sourced all the ingredients in an area around 300 kilometers around Deventer. And that's also to show that we have nothing to hide. We want to be transparent. And because we think it's so important to produce locally and to show exactly where our ingredients come from, we decided also, now once we have the technology, once we have this circular technology, we want to open it up to others, to third parties. And that's on the next slide. I think, yes. We want, as I mentioned, we want to bring rest to the world, and that's why we've also said we do not want to keep our invention to ourselves. We want others to embrace the technology. We want them to join us, because we cannot make the difference by ourselves alone. So we have said we want to license our technology to other manufacturers of mattresses. So we are talking to them and we are offering them our production capacity. And we are also talking straightly to competitors to set up an extended producer responsibility, an EPR. And that is also interesting because it means that we talk together with our competitors about how we see the world of mattresses recycling. We want to organize that in a joint way. We want to do that together. Because and it has already started, I think, in other industries like glass or maybe cars, the government also invites you to think with them and to make, they basically say, well, you're a manufacturer, we make you responsible for the post-consumer stage of the products that you manufacture. So we said we can do that by ourselves, or we can do it together with others, or we can wait until the government comes up with legislation. And we said, well, let's do it together with others and set up an extended producer responsibility. And we have been working on that together with some of our main competitors, of which we are basically the smallest. We have been working on that for 2 years, and we expect this to be actual in the beginning of next year. And that helps to share knowledge. So we are also building a frontrunner group of knowledge sharing on these topics. And we collaborate not only with the competitors, but also with stakeholders in the mattresses recycling industry. And we share knowledge to make it better today for tomorrow. And I guess another important stakeholder in our case is also consumers. So we have built also a campaign to raise awareness amongst consumers around mattresses landfill. Because many consumers, especially in the Netherlands, are not fully aware of when they abandon a mattress on the street or somewhere else. So it creates huge problems for the environment. And once we have explained it, and once we say that to them, this is not such a good idea, you should be careful with it. It can be reused, or maybe you could, for the next time, make a different choice when you purchase a mattress. Influence behavior. We have started to raise awareness for this topic instead of only wanting to sell our products. So before we want to sell this product, we say, well, we have to make people aware of what is going on in the world. And that's what we have called the story of 1.5 million mattresses in the Netherlands, and it's 35 million mattresses discarded in Europe only each year. We have used old abandoned mattresses as the canvas for presenting our new story. So we have built a whole campaign using the object discarded mattresses as the tool to convey our new message. And that's a film which I will not share here, but it's very interesting to see what you can do and how you can make people aware of a story, an important story. So that's the first example about mattresses. And the second example is more, also very recent. It's about how we showed our engagement in the pandemic. Early on in March, or by the end of March, when Corona hit the Netherlands, we said we want to help, we want to do something, and we sat together with some companies in our neighborhood, and we decided to produce or to come up with a prototype for face masks, because there was a lot of lack of capacity producing face masks. Actually, they were not available in the Netherlands. No one was producing them, and we wanted to help the healthcare sector. And if you look back at it now, we did that also in collaboration with other companies. In the first stage of the whole project, for the product development and the certification, we worked in a consortium with some others, and also for the large-scale production phase of the project, we also worked in a consortium. But if you look back at it now, it totally fits our heritage and our purpose, because Johannes Auping was a blacksmith based in Deventer. And he made stoves, and he did stuff that a blacksmith does. But he was asked to develop a bed for a hospital in the neighborhood. And he had never done that before, but he said, well, I have steel, I can give it a shot and I will do it. And that's what he did. And we were extremely excited almost that we were able to help in this crisis, that we managed to come up with a suitable product, and that we could do this in line with, we think how he wanted to have us to act in this crisis. So it totally fits our heritage and purpose that we collaborated with so many parties in this crisis to help the healthcare. A few things that we learned in terms of engagement with stakeholders was the collaboration with the Dutch government. We were not so experienced with that, to be honest, but it went very well. There were very capable people in this crisis organization, LCH, from companies and from the government, working together to do the best they could in the crisis. And we have really experienced great support and great efforts from all of them. And we also learned how to deal with liability. We were suddenly developing a product meant for healthcare, whereas we are a company making beds and mattresses for consumer markets. So that was also a bit of a positive challenge, I would say, and also how to deal with press and maintain a good reputation, because it could also go wrong. If something could go wrong, then we could have had an issue also with our consumer products. And I think that was a steep learning curve, which we managed by doing it all together. We had a great spirit within our company and with the people around us. And we even created jobs. We have now 100 people helping us in the face mask production, which are all new colleagues. And for the first time in our history, we work 24/7 hours a day. because normally we wouldn't do that. We sleep at night, but it's a huge positive vibe to be able to contribute. And I think that also shows a bit the spirit and the mindset in our company, and that's a very bold B Corp move, I would almost say, that we did here. And then the next slide is just to show you that we were happy by the end of April. So we had a startup phase for this whole project, but by the end of April, we were together with the other partners in the consortium able to offer the first box of face masks, which were at that time still handmade. Because we had no machines yet, we started producing them by hand, and we delivered the first box to the Minister of Healthcare, Martin van Rijn, at that time. So two very practical examples to show how we managed in a few months' time to contribute by collaborating with other stakeholders and working forwards together.
Well, Ine, thank you very much. And also, of course, Dylan and Frederik. I don't know if it's possible to stop the slide sharing so we can see the speakers in full screen. Otherwise, you can also go to speaker view if you like. There are already coming some great questions through the chat box and the Q&A, and one that I particularly like, and what was also on my list, is how do you get stakeholders in the same direction? And maybe an interesting question for Dylan or Frederik to comment on that. Dylan, maybe I can give you the floor first.
Yeah, so what we try to do specifically when it comes to stakeholder engagement in the supply chain is try to really focus also on the benefits for suppliers themselves, what the possible consequences could be of implementing changes. In auditing, it's quite different. There's simply an external force. They set the rules and you need to follow because you want to have business. And what we try to do is really try to look at what makes sense for the supplier at this stage, and try to then also speak their language in terms of what would be the return on investment and the actual business case for them taking that approach. And it can be found across the board, whether it's environmental, where the bottom line improves simply because they become more efficient, use less energy, energy costs money, there's a business case, or whether it's more in the social domain because they're faced with a lot of turnover, for instance, which in a lot of manufacturing countries is a very serious issue. And they can also make changes there simply by offering a more safe workplace or better labor conditions, which actually pay themselves back by not having to continuously hire new resources. So that's how we try to align and really speak their language in driving initiatives.
And does that mean, Dylan, that you have different conversations with different stakeholders, or do you have a focused company story that you tell? Because you say you have different language that you use.
Yeah, so it's more the language of the supplier itself, and then it depends on their maturity. So if I look specifically at supplier engagement, it's typically on a one-on-one basis that we simply approach a supplier, look at where are you now and what makes sense for next steps. And so because we do it on such an individual basis and we invest the resources to look at their specific situation, it is very easy then, of course, to also explain it and what would be the actual benefits for them.
And Dylan, I was wondering as well, could you elaborate a little more on the discussions that you have with suppliers, especially if you look at supply chains, which are very, very wide. There is a supplier of a supplier of a supplier, and before you know it, it's 7 steps or 8 steps away from your own company. How far do you go into that supply chain?
Yeah, it depends a little bit. So if we look at our direct engagement program that typically focuses on our first tier suppliers, as a company, we have more than 4,000 of them that provide inputs to the products that we put out on the market. And so that's quite a big group already, of course, to try to actively engage on such a topic. But so what we try to do is also strike partnerships with the suppliers that are a little bit further in their sustainability journey. And we use them actually to then start addressing also our tier 2 and our tier 3 suppliers, onboarding them in the engagement program that we currently have ourselves. And we also have programs that focus specifically on the deeper end of our supply chain, the mineral space, simply because there are a lot of challenges there. And if you look at, well, your own model or the model of maturity and different tiers of suppliers, that would be tier 4, that we as Philips do not really have any impact or leverage over what happens in the minerals extractors industry. Simply because we do not have any buying power there, we're not recognized as the customer, so our voice and our suggestions are not considered as much. And so we do that through multi-stakeholder initiatives, where we partner with a lot of peer companies, where we partner with governments, civil society organizations, NGOs, and we basically create a voice of many, a collective initiative to then really try to drive change there. And even then, it is quite a difficult one compared to making a change at a direct stakeholder of ourselves. But so yeah, there it is also about then having a shared vision, I think, is what makes those multi-stakeholder initiatives most successful.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think a dilemma that many of us will recognize when dealing with an international supply chain. And Frederik, you told us about the engagement process that NN Group is currently undertaking for quite a few years already. And with the current society focusing on financial institutions who are still investing in oil, for instance, in fossil fuels, wouldn't it be much easier to exclude those type of investments, or would you prefer engagement?
Yeah, good question. A very current question also. As NNIP has the approach, because they're an active investor, that they always try to look at the effects on the real economy when it comes to well, decarbonizing of our assets. And we indeed engage with a lot of parties, for example, NGOs who would rather see us exclude certain assets, and also well, quite active in their approach to us. But what we try to keep in mind is that we can exclude certain companies, which makes our balance sheet look better in that sense. But then the effect that we have on the companies and the influence that we might have if we still invest in them is lost. So the important thing that we keep in mind is really the effect that these actions have on the real economy and not only on our balance sheet. So this is why we would also, this is why we'd rather engage with these companies and not exclude them. And sometimes that leads to difficult discussions with NGOs mostly, but we try to really, convince them of our approach.
Okay, thank you. I would like to jump also to one of the aspects that is in our model, and that's disclosure, because we strongly believe that if you disclose on how you have approached your stakeholders, what type of stakeholders you have included, what's your motivation and the targets, then stakeholders can get a better understanding of what you're doing, what you're aiming for, and where you're at the moment. And that also is about disclosing dilemmas and trade-offs, for instance. When we look at trade-offs, stakeholder needs can be different. There can be a misalignment between stakeholders. So is that something that NN Group, for instance, is taken up very seriously, or are there maybe obstacles there?
No, we definitely try to, well, we take it very seriously. NNIP, the asset management part of NN Group, has therefore published for the second time now a responsible investing report in which they highlight the different engagements that they have with companies, but also as part of multi-stakeholder initiatives. And through case studies there, they try to highlight also the different stages that they have within engagement processes with companies. But this is something that's very high on the agenda. And I believe also given current regulation, transparency and reporting will only become much more important. So I believe that dilemmas there will be much more attention paid to it in the coming years.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too, and hopefully so, because it will give a better understanding of where you're at.
Absolutely.
And Ina, thank you, Frederik. And Ina, a question for you. You mentioned in your presentation that you were sourcing the materials for the mattresses locally. Now that can be a trade-off as well, because developing countries are dependent on our level of consumption. Is that something that you have taken into account while making the choices on where to source your materials?
Good question. I'm not really sure. But what I'm sure of is that we, as a company, have the vision to be as sustainable as we can. And that in our vision also means that we have to organize our manufacturing nearby. That's why we have a factory in the Netherlands and not in a country far away. And that's also why we have about 5 years ago centralized the production to one site, because before we had like 2 different production sites in Deventer and one in elsewhere in the Netherlands. And that was also a time when we redesigned the whole production process, and we organize it now as lean as we can. So no waste during the whole production process. For instance, we produce on customer order. So if you buy a mattress or a bed in an Auping store or in a web store, we only start producing it when you have placed your order. And that means a completely different model. And that also means that we have challenged our suppliers to deliver right on time, or just in time, actually. But that means in our whole process, there's much more efficiency, there's less waste. We don't have a warehouse full of white beds or grayish box spring beds. That's about what the Netherlands is buying. Whereas we have many beautiful colors as well in fabric or in water-based coatings. But yeah, it's a choice that we have made by that time, and to do it as nearby as we can, because we believe in local production. And to be honest, I think if, yeah, we are a Dutch company, our main business is in the Netherlands and the markets around us, Belgium, Germany, Scandinavia. Yes, we also do some export, and that's also interesting business. But I think if for every year there's the story: should we go further away, or should we build on the export business? We have now decided we grow slowly from Deventer and the markets around us. And if we were to go far away overseas, I think there we should develop a new Deventer factory then, or in the States or at another continent. So to come back to your question, I think we have made a different, we have taken a different direction a bit to, so we, so it's a different approach, I think. But we collaborate with other family-owned business in Taiwan, and they do the technical stuff for our adjustable mesh bases, for instance, adjustable beds. And that has been a very long time relation already, but that's still another market or another continent and country than that you are describing. So I guess different story. Yeah.
Well, I think managing a company is all about making choices. So thank you for that. Yeah. There were many questions during the presentations about change on a systemic level. As we see, as presented by the SDGs, many of our challenges are intertwined, they're interconnected. If you focus on one SDG, you will have trade-offs on the other SDG. So, but also if you focus on one SDG, you can have benefits in another SDG. So it's very important with international supply chain and businesses all having trade relationships with each other to look on a systemic level. And there is an interesting study by the World Benchmarking Alliance who have identified 7 systemic changes underlying the SDGs, for instance, from linear to circular. So maybe Dylan, you can, Philips is a large company with a huge impact. Do you see that Philips is taking on that challenge, that systemic challenge? And can you explain a little bit about how Philips is doing that?
Sure, yeah. So also the example that you then mentioned of moving from a linear economy to a circular economy, that's something that Philips has embraced as a vision quite some time ago. So already in our 2020 program, which is finalizing this year, there are a number of elements there which really speak to the circular economy. 100% of our operations globally are powered by renewable energy. 15% of our revenues are coming from circular propositions or products. For quite a while in the Netherlands, we had the campus in Best, which is close to Eindhoven, where we basically refurbish old large medical equipment and give it a second life and put that back into the market. If you look at hospitals, then often university hospitals really want the latest and greatest, most innovative technology, but smaller hospitals are fully able to also run their daily business with products that maybe have been put out on the market 7 years ago, for instance. And so there's really a great market for those refurbished products, and we as a company feel that we're quite well equipped to make use of rest value of products that we had put out before. Simply because the materials there are still of a lot of value for us, but also for our customers, clearly. So for 2025, our ambition in that space has only ever increased, not only focusing then on large medical equipment, but actually on all the medical equipment that we put out on the market that we want to be in the bidding to take it back once a customer can no longer use it. As well as that in our sites, for instance, we do not send any of our waste to landfill. Everything is recycled or incinerated as long as it is then used for energy purposes. And we're also then looking, of course, in our supply chain on how we can actually drive the systemic change there to becoming more circular. For instance, having then conversations with our suppliers from the start that we do not only want to buy from them, but we also want them to become, in a way, a customer by buying that old product back once we are, for instance, done with it, or once it was part of a product that came back to us and we're not equipped ourselves to then really refurbish and give it second life to. So it's a driver for partnerships, and it involves really a lot of different stakeholders to make such a change happen, but we're very committed to it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll have a look at Karen, if there are questions in the Q&A or in the chat that we would like to address in the panel. Maybe Karen can...
Yes, sure. Yeah, there are some interesting questions. There's a question from Astrid, which is quite similar to a question from Karin Bausma. And they're wondering, there seems to be a lot of attention going out to stakeholders like governments, customers, business partners, employees, but how to handle stakeholder inclusion with local communities or local life workers unions or local NGOs. So how do the companies approach them, and what kind of conversations do they have? I know that Dylan already told something about it, so perhaps Ina could respond to that.
Yeah, also good question. I think maybe we have a bit to learn there still. I think we, over the past years, we have been very open to all sorts of questions that we get for help in terms of knowledge or budget or issues. And we have been able to help where we could, but I think by now really including it in our strategy and in the way we are as a company, and maybe it's the fact that we became B Corp certified that helps us in driving these proposals, and maybe also initiate them a bit more from ourselves. Because if we look at what we do in the local community in Deventer, then I think we give back quite something to associations in sports or cultural or nature, the world around us. But I think really driving the talks with NGOs and really understanding what's going on there, I think we can improve as a company. And I think that's a perfect topic to become a bit more activist on it in a positive way, I would say. I'm not sure if that answers, but I think there's a lot to win from our side and a lot to give back, much more than we have shown now.
Yeah, thanks. Dylan, do you want to add something there, or?
Maybe also give an opportunity to NN to comment on it.
Yeah, if I can
Sure.
add to that, I think turning the question around, we as an N, we sometimes have the luxury that the NGOs or trade unions they find us, for example, by being present during AGMs, but also in the Netherlands, NN is part of also a multi-stakeholder initiative for the insurance sector, the International CSR Covenant. In which FNV, for example, is also a party. So we really work on a very effective level together with them to create policies in that sense. So I guess it's also a way of being part of initiatives in which where you can find each other and really learn from each other and together work on productive policy making.
Mm.
Okay, thanks. So there are two other questions which are more or less related from Simone and from Firas. And that's the question actually for all of you. So a single company can only have an impact to a certain limits. But if you're able to influence your competitors or your competitors, that's a new word. So it's the cooperative competitor. So how do you feel about that? Do you really have an influence on your competitors? And do you also think they see what you're doing and they're interested and they also try to include more stakeholders? So what is your effect in a broader sense of word?
Yeah, maybe I can comment there from a supplier engagement perspective. Of course, we started back in 2004, and at the time you really did not see a lot of companies already looking at that part of the value chain. I think it was part of the front runners at the time that started to focus beyond their own gates, let's say, that made it more common. And now the entire electronics industry, of course, doesn't really get away with a sustainability program if it's only focused on their own operations. You need to include also the impact that you're making through your products, and you need to consider the impact that you're making in your supply chain. And so being a first mover typically inspires your competitors to catch up. So if I look at the engagement strategy that we've had since 2016, if you look at the language that we use, focusing on trust, focusing on capability building, you see that now back in a lot of other annual reports. I'm quite often in conversation with them, and then it turns out that their reality is not really our reality just yet, but that is the way that they're communicating, at least, about it. And hopefully it will lead them to actually also catch up to the communication that they're putting out. But so I think there's definitely an inspirational aspect. And if you have a good business case for anything, then sooner or later, the rest of the industry surely will catch up there.
I see Ine is also on mute, so maybe you want to add something?
Yeah, I think I recognize a bit what Dylan says. I think once you start doing things a bit differently and when they are good, then the industry will follow. And I think we have noticed that years ago when we when we started the program to take back old mattresses from consumers that had bought a new mattress, we said, well, when we come deliver the mattress to your home, please give us your old mattress and we take care of it. We make sure that we recycle as much of it as possible. And that was 10 years ago, and now it's a standard service with all the competitors. And by only showing the example, we were seen as a front runner in our industry. And we for a long time already, we were seen as maybe a front runner in circular thinking. Nowadays, and luckily now, since this year, we are maybe a front runner in also circular acting, or we're actually doing it now with a mattress. And we have just seen the pictures that now we have the proof that we can make from a ticking, like the cover of a mattress that has been used, and we can recycle it and make a new ticking out of it again with very high quality. Without losing raw materials. And that's small steps, but by showing it, we show the way for competition. And then I would also say that there's many different definitions of circularity also in our industry. I think we raised the bar and we put it very high, and our definition of what a circular mattress is not yet the same definition as others use already, and they also talk about it. But I think they can grow a bit in how you rate it and how you value it. So I think it's important to take your competition with you, or your competitors, or the cooperative competitors. Very nice. I didn't know the word yet. You have to keep on talking to them, and even though they have maybe a different business model, or maybe think differently about, in our case, what a quality mattress is, I think you have to open your door and from time to time talk to them to make it as a collective, make it better. And that's important.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ine. And I think you have just showcased what stewardship looks like, a discussion we had earlier in the presentation of Eric. I see that we are already running out of time. I think we could have talked for hours and hours, but I would like to give the floor with 2 short questions and maybe just a short answer for all of you, for all our panelists. Can you give one challenge that you see for the future if you look at stakeholder engagement? And can you give one tip to the audience here listening to us? So Frédéric, maybe I can give you the floor.
I am on mute. A challenge for us is still, I mean, we might be a large party in the Netherlands, but globally there are so many different voices and things that might seem natural for us in the world here or in Europe might be viewed upon very differently in other parts of the world. So for us, it's also trying to get ourselves heard on an international level, and that's still quite a challenge for us as an investor. And the tip is, would you want to do the tip afterwards?
No, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think, yeah, stakeholder engagement is about building relationships, finding solutions, sharing expertise. And we just talked about the, what was it, collaborative competitor. And I would just say make use of that. Try to find each other and engage together and try to share, try to join forces to really collaborate. And because as a group, you're much stronger than just one singular company.
Yeah, great. And your tip and challenge are also interconnected. Yep. Very nice. Thank you, Frédéric. Dylan, what would you say the biggest challenge for Philips and your tip?
Yes, I think one of the big challenges, if you look at a systemic change that you're trying to accomplish with stakeholders, is that there should be some patience because it often takes a long time. And then my tip in that would be to show consistency in how you engage with your stakeholders. So if you treat them as partners, then continuously try to treat them as partners and not just have it as a single event where you communicate it, but then your actions don't really live up to that. That would be it.
Well, I think your challenge is a very hard one for many of us who are eager to see the SDGs goals obtained, to have patience, at least if I talk for myself. Thank you. And Ine?
I think as a challenge is when you want to go circular, you could be confronted with an increase of cost rather than a decrease of it. And it's very easily said that could be a reason not to go for it or not to do it. So I think you have to show some resilience from time to time, or to come back to the initial question or the initial idea that you had. If you want to embrace this, then you also have to go for it and leave the cost out, although it's not although it's an important part of it. But I guess I'm trying to say that you have to stick to your plan and actually do it, although a cost aspect could be a very simple reason not to do it. And you have to keep on explaining that from time to time, even internally, even to people who are with you already. And I think that's an important one to realize. don't give up on it. And I think then the tip is related to it also. Once you have found something like we did with the circular technology, open up to others, because alone you can achieve something, but together you can go much faster. So share it with others, even though it's a bit awkward in the beginning, and even though it's not comfortable to sit with your competitor and explaining how you precisely do it, but still you have to do it, because I guess you owe it to the generation afterwards.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Ina, Dylan and Frederik, thank you very much for your participation in this panel. And if this would have been a live session, you would have got a big round of applause, I think, from everybody. Maybe we can go to the slide, because there's one slide that we would like to share with you on the recommendations that we have included in the or in the publication as well. And when I'm referring to the publication, it's the publication that you can find on the website of Global Compact Netherlands. Hopefully somebody will put the link in the chat. After the research that we have done, there were 10 recommendations that we thought could enhance stakeholder engagement in relation to the SDGs. And you can read them out here. I will not dive deep into them all, but there are 2 that have come across in this webinar as well. So focus on systemic change rather than individual or incremental change. We need big, bold steps if you look at the ambition laid out by the SDGs. And since all our problems are intertwined, we need a systemic approach. And also what is very helpful is focus on outcomes or impact, so to say, rather than output. So looking at targets and pursued outcomes, financial gains are obviously very important, but also look at the non-financial gains from stakeholder engagement. So you can read the recommendations. I would highly recommend to read the report if you haven't done that so far. And I think I'll give the floor to Linda for some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you, Nicolette. We are coming to the end of this webinar. I hope we have given you new insights on the importance of stakeholder inclusion. And we hope you can use the best practices in your work. As GCNL, we will follow up to spread this message. Firstly, GCNL and also Nicolette and Eric are available to answer your personal questions and to assist you in your actions to improve stakeholder engagement in your business. And secondly, we will follow all European, international and national discussions which can be of importance for stakeholder engagement. And we will bring this topic and also this publication to the international agenda and the agenda of UN Global Compact. Thirdly, as Global Compact Network Netherlands, we are also a stakeholder ourselves, and we will collaborate with other stakeholders to join forces to accelerate the SDG agenda. I would like to thank all the people who have contributed to the publication and to this webinar. Eric and Nicolette, the co-authors, but also Karen, Jeroen, Herman, Jaap, Hugo, Babs, and Saskia, members of the task force. You put a lot of energy into this work, and on behalf of Global Compact Network Netherlands, we would like to thank you for this. And of course, also the companies who were represented today to show their best practices. NN Group, Frederik, Royal Auping, Ina, and Philips, Dylan. Thanks a lot. Thank you also for participating, everybody, in this webinar. Thank you for joining us. There will be more events in the future, in the coming future. And we have a webinar on sustainable leadership on the 3rd of November, and a virtual event for SMEs on the 16th of November. So hopefully you will join us all also in these events. Thank you very much.